Hello, guys. This is Pinkie, the housewife, and I have some breaking news for you all. Some of you all probably already heard it, but if not, um, it happened today uh, at the courthouse, in the courtroom, should I say, in the courtroom. Sean Diddy Combs, Puff Daddy, P Diddy, the Diddler, Dirty Diddy, whatever you want to call him. But anyway, uh, it happened in the courtroom. All right. Um, Let me just have everybody hit the like button before I get on with the information. All right, hit that like button if you can, and go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Let me say thank you, guys. Now let's go ahead and get on with the information. All right, the Diddler, Sean Diddy Combs. Today, today is Thursday. In the courtroom, he's trying to get the jury on his side, nodding and smiling and looking over at the jury. That's a no no. You can't influence the jury. Do you know better? But don't worry, Judge is on it. He is not letting Diddy get past that. That's something you don't supposed to do. Okay? He's trying to do what he always do to people, trying to influence them and everything. But no, Diddy, the judge see you. Okay? He warned his attorneys, should I say, that if he keeps doing what he's doing, think nobody is seeing him. This is when a time when his attorney um, was going mayhem, trying to go at one of the witnesses on the stand. Okay, and Diddy think he's going to be a little sneaky rat and nod at him and look at him and stare at him and make face. No, you can't do that. Judge see everything. Okay, so I got this video, okay, from CNN. They're going to tell you all about it. So I'm going to go ahead and play it for y'all so you can hear it for yourself. All right? Let me get Dirty Diddy down. No, I shouldn't call him Dirty Diddy. Let me go get the Diddler down. Okay, here it is, guys. Oh, let me do this and enlarge it for you. That information will be in my description box about the Dirty Diddy. All right, here it goes for you.
First breaking news just now: the trial ongoing of Sean Diddy Combs. Our Laura Coates has been covering. She's outside the court. Tell us about the theatrics inside the court.
There was a major moment just now inside the Diddy trial. While the jury had left the room, the judge had a conference with the actual attorneys, at which point the judge said, I was so clear this morning to Mr. Agnifilo, who is the lead counsel. I was so clear this morning there were not to be any reactions to this jury. There were not to be any theatrics. Was I or was I not clear? Mr. Agnifilo said that they were clear about it. He then admonished Sean Diddy Combs, the defendant in this RICO trafficking and prostitution case, that he had been nodding at the jury. He had been looking straight at the jurors. The judge, in no uncertain terms, said that that was not the correct behavior and that he threatened to preclude Sean Diddy Combs from being inside of the courtroom for possibly the duration of his own trial if he continued to look at the jurors and nod and react in any way to the testimony that was coming in. This was a really big moment, of course, for the judge to make this statement. He is on trial, of course, fighting for his life, could spend the rest of his life in prison if he is convicted of all 5 charges. The judge said he expects this not to happen again, that the defendant in his case would look at the jurors, would nod, or in any way react. And you can imagine if you are the jury in this case, hearing testimony come in where the defense was scoring some significant points to a witness by the name of Vanna, who they tried to chip away from her credibility line by line, even suggesting she did not know the date of the alleged dangling off the balcony incident, or that she was somehow in cahoots with for to concoct some narrative and to promote Bonna's own civil lawsuit. So you have the impression for the jury that he's not able to react in some way. How would that possibly hamstring the defense? This just happened. Sean Diddy Combs threatened with not being able to be present for his trial if he reacts or nods and looks at the jury who is waiting to decide his own fate.
And Laura, as someone who has been in a number of courtrooms, seen a number of cases, how rare is it for something like this to happen, for a judge to say, listen, you keep doing this, you're not going to be sitting here for your own trial?
I have seen it, of course, with theatrical and particularly disruptive defendants who were told to calm down or not to be theatrical in the way they are presenting the jury to sway them. I've also heard it if the judge believes that somehow the conduct of the defendant might possibly influence or intimidate the jurors in this case, direct eye contact or otherwise. But to have this particular reaction in this high profile of a case where the defense is well versed in the appellate process and knows full well that anything that the judge orders their defendant or client not to do, if a conviction results, could very well go up on appeal. And of course, you've got the common sense notion. Imagine, if you will, the hypothetical, if you were accused of a horrendous crime, and the jurors will naturally, as human beings, look to the defendant for some human reaction of any kind. If one is not provided, there could be some adverse inference drawn for that jurors. And so if you are a defendant, it is a human instinct to react. The judge, however, had a very tight leash on this trial, including the attorneys and beyond. This was a moment that I have not seen where Sean Diddy Combs, who is normally stoic, looking ahead, has been threatened. If he reacts and looks at the jury and nods along with the testimony in an effort to try to persuade them on his own thoughts, he could possibly not be present for his own criminal federal trial.
In your experience, Laura, does, and that's a prospect, we don't know what's going to happen, but does not having the defendant present, is that a disadvantage typically for the defense?
It could very well be, of course, because the jurors are going to be left to try to understand why he is not present. The judge could give a curative instruction, which the judge said today, you don't want to hear the instruction I would give that jury, which led the people in the audience who were remaining. We were all getting ready to leave out. There was a break that was sustained for about a 30-minute period. I lingered behind, waiting to hear their different arguments that might be raised, and to my stunning surprise, hearing the judge give this admonishment and saying, quote, let me make my own record here. If the defendant is not present in his case, particularly in a case of this magnitude, the jury could be left to think of what they might conclude and infer. And no defense counsel wants their client's absence to be interpreted independently by a jury of his peers.
And Laura, again, just for anyone joining us, we are following this breaking news that just happened in the courtroom where the judge admonished Sean Diddy Combs and saying that he could be excluded from the courtroom if he continued to make faces at the jury. I do want to ask you, as we look ahead to the rest of the day, obviously you'll be keeping a close eye on what Combs is doing in there if he puts himself in that position to be essentially kicked out of the courtroom. But we're going to hear this testimony from an accuser using the pseudonym Jane. What are we expecting from that testimony?
Well, the jury is waiting to hear information regarding the claims that the prosecution must carry its burden of proof to conclude. Remember, there are 5 felony charges that could result in a lifetime conviction for Sean Diddy Combs. And every single witness will be important in establishing the prosecution's burden of proof. RICO cases are notoriously difficult to prove because it requires the jurors to connect dots independently and alongside of a prosecution team that is trying to ensure that they will be able to connect the dots through a closing argument at the end of a trial. We were told initially this could be up to an 8 to 10 week trial. So imagine putting the pin in the status quo for the jurors. But we expect to hear further testimony in today and the days beyond, where the prosecution is going to try to enhance the credibility of prior witnesses, prior stated victims, and the allegations they've said, and this afternoon will continue to be no different. However, now we've got this added discussion where the defendant in this case, Sean Diddy Combs, is going to have to, as my parents used to say when I was acting up, fix my face to make sure that I'm not displaying anything that would be problematic. But this is a defendant. I was a kid. This is a defendant in a conviction possible. He's innocent, of course, but a case that could, if convicted, lead to the rest of his life behind bars. And people in the audience were thinking to themselves, and for that, he has to have a straight face? How can that be?
The stakes are very high. Laura Coates, outside the courtroom there in New York. Thank you so much for that breaking news update. Really appreciate it.
Defense attorney Misty Harris is live just outside the courthouse where this moment just took place. Misty, I wonder if you could describe the significance of this move by the judge. I mean, one, how unusual is it? But two, what effect might it have on the defense, on the trial?
Right, Jim, it's very significant. And in fact, it is the most extreme course of action and curative action to remove the defendant from the courtroom. So there's a federal rule on this issue, and it says that if a defendant is disruptive in the courtroom after being warned, then one of the curative things that can happen is to actually remove the defendant from the courtroom if that conduct persists. So here, now we're hearing the warning. And again, in the commentary from the judge, but directing at the defense team, he said, did I not make this loud and clear before, that this disruptive conduct cannot continue? And if it does continue, then we may seek to remove him from the courtroom. Now, the reason that this is so significant is that a defendant has the right to face their accusers. So it is truly the most extreme form of action that the judge will take. And the reason to do it is not really because the defendant is looking engaged, passing notes to their attorney, the other things that we've seen Combs do during the course of this trial. It's really when it comes down to any interaction with the jury, that there is some way that he is trying to influence or intimidate those jurors. And so the nodding of the head directly at the jurors during the testimony was a bridge too far for this judge. And now the warning is out there, and the next step could be removal, which would be pretty devastating to the defense.
And I do want to ask you about that, Misty, as a defense attorney. Walk us through just how impactful that is if you have a client that isn't sitting there while all of this testimony is being heard about them, about their alleged actions.
It's absolutely impactful for so many reasons. First, if the defendant were to be removed in any case, and in this case in particular, you would automatically have a significant appellate issue about whether or not that was the appropriate way to handle the situation. So that's one piece of it. And you're thinking about any appellate issues from the defense perspective. But from an optics perspective, if your client is not in the room during the trial, the jury will absolutely notice. And that could potentially be prejudicial to the defense of the case. And when we're talking about the severity of the charges here, although that's not really a factor in making this type of determination, in any case, that defendant has the right to be there. But from the optics perspective of the jury looking at an empty defense table, it is likely that they will look at that negatively. And there will be question marks that will never be explained to them as to the why. So from a defense perspective, it would be a catastrophe. And so my guess is that there's going to be a harsh conversation behind the scenes with the defense team about keeping the conduct in line.